In 1992, Gary Chapman, the Christian minister, life coach, and radio personality, released the book The 5 Love Languages. The basic claim made by the book is that there are 5 primary love languages: acts of service, quality time, physical touch, words of affirmation, and gift giving. The vast majority of us have one dominant love language, one way that we feel and communicate love, and a good way to make our marriages happier is to learn and practice the love language of our partner. Since its release, the claims made by this book have taken on a life of their own. There are TikToks about the love languages, YouTube videos, online quizzes, card games you can play. It is a cultural phenomenon. And if I wanted to, I could come up with a few problems with this book and with the arguments it describes. For one thing, Chapman presents these languages as 5 separate ways that people can love. They're independent from one another. You being receptive to any one language doesn't make you receptive to any other. My love language is acts of service, but not gift giving. My love language is physical touch, but not words of affirmation. But this model seems to ignore that for the vast majority of people, these love languages build on each other. For example, the amount of physical touch you get from your partner is going to be highly correlated with the amount of quality time you spend with them. The same is true of words of affirmation, right? Sure, there are ways to get that without quality time, but it doesn't hurt your chances. If a couple has an intimate date night twice a week, they are a lot more likely to say nice stuff to each other. In fact, for most people, I'd say that quality time is not just one expression of love, it is its essential foundation. Wanting to spend time with your spouse enables the relationship to exist and have meaning. These aren't just unrelated variables, different languages. They fundamentally connect. Another gripe I have is that it's unclear why these in particular are supposed to be the 5 elemental love languages. You know, when I think about what makes me feel loved, a huge aspect of that is joking, laughing, and making someone else laugh. Booby, 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 booby. If I was writing a list of my love languages, that would certainly be on it. And of course, you could think that of lots of things. Maybe your love language has to do with getting along with your friends. Maybe your love language is trust and freedom, a partner who is fine with you having your own life, doing what you want to do. And what makes any of these less legitimate a love language than giving gifts is? I mean, I give and receive presents maybe twice a year, and that seems true for most people I know. My point here is simply that love takes a lot of forms, and Chapman seems to just choose some love-associated words and call it a day. It doesn't really seem like the 5 categories of love to me. It isn't just Chapman's use of the love languages that I find worthy of interrogation, though. It's also the concept itself, the idea of a love language. Obviously, Chapman does not literally believe that quality time is a language. You know, it's a metaphor, but metaphor shapes feelings, shapes the way we interpret stories and events. And in the case of this book, I'm not sure its central metaphor does its subject justice. Very often in this book, Chapman will take the concept of love as language very seriously. Say that learning to listen may be as difficult as learning another language, or that the emotional love language you and your partner speak may be as different as English and Chinese. And it's just super weird to read. I understand this might be true of some people. There are individuals who very well might absolutely not understand their partner's desires. But is this really the case for a sizable number of couples? English and Chinese are mutually incomprehensible, and to make the claim that your love language, your desire to spend quality time with your partner, or to have them say nice stuff to you, might plausibly be completely incoherent to the person you love, both seems unrealistic and frankly depressing. To me, this feels like Chapman overstating his own case, making the love languages out to be this impossibly huge concept so that people will take his work to be more insightful and important. And really, that's a problem with the book as a whole, a problem with most self-help books, if I'm being honest. These kinds of books often trade in the idea of the big secret. Chapman is bringing us this new, formerly unknown information about love and marriage, and as he says the reader acquiring this information will save their marriage. But, it can't do that. It could never do that. Let me tell you about one passage of this book. Chapman is talking to a guy about his unhappy marriage, and he suggests that his wife's love language is quality time and that she isn't getting enough of it. The guy responds, "Dr. Chapman, that is what she's always complained about. I didn't do things with her. I didn't spend any time with her. That's her love language, all right, no question about it. But Dr. Chapman, what am I gonna do? My job is so demanding." And Chapman basically just responds, do it. Spend time with her. Quote, "Where will you find the time? You will make it. You're a wise man." You can see the issue here, right? Chapman has added nothing to this man's life. It's true that communicating with your partner about their desires is good, and saying that can be helpful, but it's just not some kind of relationship panacea. This guy knows what his wife wants. The problem in this relationship, the one that is orders of magnitude more difficult to solve, is actually giving it to her when he's sleepy. And that's the problem that Chapman just dismisses out of hand. Finally, I just want to say that I don't like the vibes of this book. I don't trust Michael Chapman. I think he's a weirdo. I can't convey this. I can't find you a quote and convey to you why I don't like the vibes of the book, but they are all off. They are all off. Every page I found myself just feeling weird about the vibes of the book. Maybe I'll talk some other time about these vibes, but for now I'll just say it. I'll just say that I don't like them. Anyway, I imagine I'm getting some comments right now explaining how and why I'm wrong about love languages. And while I'm sure I won't agree with those comments, let me just say this. If you like the love languages, I don't think you should care all that much about the problems I just raised. I think tarot is cool, pulling cards from a deck and learning what they say about your life. And I don't like it because I think the cards hold psychic power or because it's helpful in a clinical setting. I like it because it's fun, because it's an excuse to connect with your friends and loved ones, because no matter what card you get, there will always be some way to connect it to yourself. And love languages are, in my opinion, a bit like that. They enable some people to communicate their desires and feelings, and that is ultimately fine. No, my real problem with love languages doesn't concern any particular methodological problem the model has. Rather, my question for this book is much more broad and much more simple. Why does it exist? One of William Shakespeare's most famous and beloved sonnets is Sonnet 116, and let me read it to you now. "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ, no man ever loved." So this poem is about Shakespeare establishing the permanence of love. Love doesn't change or go away, it is an ever-fixed mark. Very simple. I think what's so appealing about this poem, though, is the really odd way that Shakespeare approaches that thesis, the way he argues his point. Look at lines 2 through 4. "Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove." These are my favorite in the whole poem because they give the impression that Shakespeare is fundamentally uninterested in fucking around, that he's playing here a very important and precise kind of game. What is it that might alter love, that might remove it? Well, Shakespeare could have given examples here. Death or cheating or simmering resentment. He could have written a lot of things. He was a smart guy. But to do that would be to allow into the sonnet ambiguity, double meanings, slippage, difficult interpretations. These are the things we associate so strongly with poetry, with Shakespeare, and yet he gives them no voice. What tries to alter things? Well, here's definitely a correct answer to that question. Alteration does. What tries to remove stuff? I don't know. How about a remover? There is a powerful sense that in this poem, all Shakespeare wants is precision, to be understood, that his logic must be as rigid and unchanging as the love that he describes. You can get this sense, too, from the abstraction of this poem. You know, sonnets are most often associated with love poems. Shakespeare isn't breaking the mold there, but normally, a love sonnet is about your feelings for someone. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun, etc. But this poem is addressed to nobody. It is not about any particular true minds or the marriage that they share. No, it is only about the concept of love at its broadest level. There is nothing romantic or flowery about what Shakespeare's doing here. It is a work of philosophy, an essay. Finally, we have the last lines, the icing on the cake of this odd sonnet. If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. We might expect the end of a poem to give us something, well, poetic, but instead, Shakespeare uses this time simply to reaffirm his own correctness, and do so with a dry if-then statement. If I'm wrong, then nobody's loved. Shakespeare is making an argument, presenting you with a case, and he needs you to understand in the most direct way possible that this argument has concrete stakes, that it means something, that he's right. But here's the problem. None of this logic actually holds up. In fact, the poem is tearing apart at its seams. Let me tell you about two passages in this love language book. The first is in the Giving Gifts chapter, where Chapman shares an anecdote about one of his clients. This guy, we'll call him Turnip, lost his mother, and his wife's frankly evil boss told her that while she could take off a few hours for the funeral, she needed to be back at work for the afternoon shift. But his wife said, "No, even if you do fire me, my husband needs me today." And this is how Chapman describes it. That wife had spoken the love language of her husband, and he never forgot it. The idea being that she gave him the gift of her presence, which is, I guess, his love language. Isn't that just super weird? No, this woman did not speak her husband's love language. That's such a needless way to describe it. This funeral was presumably one of the most important and saddest days in Turnip's life, and by turning down her boss, his wife showed him how much she cared about him, how much she was there for him. We all already know that that is a loving thing to do, and so Chapman's line about how actually Turnip's love language is gift-giving only serves to confuse the point. Most of us want our partners with us on days of mourning. That's kind of all there is to say. The second passage I want to read is way more strange, though. In the Discovering Your Primary Love Language chapter, Chapman talks about a guy, Bob, who doesn't know what his love language is, words of affirmation or physical touch. And I'll just read from the book. I said, "Let me ask you this. If Carol were meeting your sexual needs, that is, if you were having quality sexual intercourse as often as you desired, but she was giving you negative words, making critical remarks, sometimes putting you down in front of others, do you think you would feel loved by her?" "I don't think so," he replied. "I think I would feel betrayed and deeply hurt. I think I would be depressed." "Bob," I said, "I think we have just discovered that your primary love language is words of affirmation." What on earth are you talking about? You have not established Bob's love language. All you've made clear is that while Bob cares about sex, he wouldn't be happy with a partner who demeaned, insulted, and ridiculed him regularly. Based on this conversation, the only thing we know about Bob is that he is a normal person who doesn't like it when people are mean to him. So, looking at just these two examples, and to be clear, I could give more, you can start to see my major issue with this book. That more often than not, the love languages don't serve to clarify and explain human emotion. Rather, they just add more words. You were not happy because your partner came through on your mother's funeral. You were happy because your love language is gift giving and she gave you the gift of her presence. You wouldn't be sad because your hypothetical partner insulted you a lot. You'd be sad because your love language is words of affirmation and she wouldn't be giving you any. It is a language that works to mystify love, to make it seem foreign and inhuman. And I guess I have to ask, why? What is the difference between saying you're mad at your partner for not giving you a birthday gift and saying you're mad at them because your love language is gift giving and they didn't give you a birthday gift? What is Michael Chapman talking about when he talks about love languages? I want you to imagine that you're getting married. The priest recites the oaths, does whatever priests do, and then says his famous line, "If anyone objects to this marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." The room is silent for a second, but then Shakespeare, you invited Shakespeare to your wedding, stands up and says, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments." We are already off to a super weird start here, right? For one, who asked? Like, if William doesn't have anything to say about your marriage, then why did he stand up? The lack of impediments is usually not a reason to say something. What's more, that word there, admit, is extremely suspect. What do you mean, William? Do you have something on your mind that you're not telling us about? Are there impediments that you could admit? But okay, Shakespeare says he's not going to say anything. He's emphatically not objecting to your marriage, so let's get on with it. But then he just kind of keeps going. Just to be clear, William says, bad things can happen. For example, there's alterations that could alter you, there are removers that could remove, but love, he says, doesn't work that way. Okay, now you're getting worried. Shakespeare is correct, after all, about alterations and removers, and it's not entirely clear to you why he thinks they couldn't affect your love. And you begin to wonder if you can even trust this guy. I mean, he told you that he wasn't going to admit impediments, but it looks like he's doing just that. It's really odd, but okay. He says your love will last, so great. Mazel tov. But he keeps going. Here's the thing, he says. You're both gonna die. Like, don't get me wrong, you will bend with time's bending sickle. You will be removed, but thankfully, love will not. Now you're starting to wonder, what is this man even talking about? You're getting married right now. This is your love he's supposed to be talking about, but suddenly you feel so distant from what he's saying. You won't last, but your love will? Doesn't seem like that great of a deal. Just one more thing, he says. Shakespeare is very much like Columbo. If I'm proven wrong about any of this, nobody's ever loved anybody. That is my parting thought as William Shakespeare. Okay, you think. Now this guy is just starting to speak gibberish. Like, he says, if I'm proven wrong, but what does that mean? How could you possibly prove him wrong about this? To be clear, he's provided zero evidence for any of his beliefs. He seems to just take it as given that love does not admit impediments, but now he's like, if you can show me with rigorous logic that the thing I just made up is wrong, well, that would be pretty interesting. And even if you could magically generate this proof for Shakespeare, it wouldn't change his beliefs at all. He says, if I'm wrong, no man's ever loved, but see, that's not how being proven wrong works. His entire point was that love doesn't alter where alteration finds. And if that's not true, it would mean that lots of people have loved, and loved with alterations. This is just Shakespeare saying, if I'm wrong, I'm right, using fancy language to make his argument look invincible. This poem does not resolve in some beautiful, meaningful message. It does not affirm anything. No, it is in crisis. Shakespeare wants to produce this argument, this unimpeachable logic, but he can't. Of course he can't. In the introduction of his 5 Love Languages book, Chapman tries to make an argument establishing when love is not love. As he claims, with the help of some psychologists, the beginning of your relationship, when you are entirely enamored with your partner, what he calls the in-love experience, is not the real thing, and that's for 3 reasons. Unlike true love, the in-love experience is not a choice we make, an act of our will. Rather, it just happens. We can't control it. Second, the in-love experience is effortless. It's easy, pure instinct. It doesn't demand anything from us. Third, the in-love experience isn't always good for us and doesn't revolve around improving ourselves or our newfound partners. So, how do we feel about the case Chapman's making? Well, I for one think it's very silly. For one, I don't think he or the psychologists he cites have some kind of particular license for policing words we all happily use every day. The very idea that some researcher or minister can define people out of love is the height of arrogance, and I don't trust anyone who thinks they can make such a claim. What's more, I just don't agree with Chapman here. Why would I accept that love had to be some conscious, effortful act? When did I choose to love my mother, my friends, my dog? Are these all illegitimate, or is there some special carve-out he's making for romantic relationships for no apparent reason? No, I don't think I have some ultimate control over the people I love, and that does include romantic love. What I find special about this argument, though, isn't so much that I disagree with it, but that it leads us into a kind of existential abyss. Like, if this so-called falling in love experience isn't that deep or valuable, if it should not even be termed love, then what makes his version of love so special? Why is this intentional, work-intensive relationship that Chapman likes important? He goes on in this section to write the following. Does that mean that having been tricked into marriage by the illusion of being in love, we are now faced with 2 options? 1, we are destined to a life of misery with our spouse, or 2, we must jump ship and try again? And it's like, at this point, who honestly cares what happens with the marriage? If we are all just duped into our relationships by arbitrary forces that mean nothing about us or the people we are with, then it's hard to see why preserving those fraudulent relationships matters. In other words, if the feelings we have for each other, the intensity of our connections, and the joy and intimacy they bring us are not enough to be called beautiful, enough to be called love, then why call anything love? What difference does any of this make? Through his strange logic, Chapman has dug himself into a void of meaninglessness. And here, we can come back to the love languages, because we can almost read them as a desperate bid to claw that meaning back. What if love was more than love? What if there were official ways it was spoken and almost all of us liked one way the most? What if doing a nice thing for your partner wasn't just nice, but an essential piece of some grand design, an eternal code that we can access? I asked before, what is the difference between saying you're sad your partner didn't get you a gift and saying your love language is gift giving so you're sad they didn't get you a gift? And the answer, I think, is that everyone likes presents. Everyone feels loved when they get one. People during the in-love illusion celebrate birthdays and buy each other nice stuff. So there must be more to it. Something that tells us we matter, that tells us our relationship is meaningful, that this isn't all just empty. So why not produce some psychological sounding jargon? Why not invent a language? A few months ago, Nerdwriter, a video essayist who kind of pioneered the genre, made a video about Sonnet 116. The video is, in general, really quite good. He makes a lot of insightful points about the poem and comes to roughly the same conclusion that I did here.
We're hearing a speaker in a void, trying to convince himself that love is somehow different than every other thing in the ephemeral universe, and not succeeding.
What interests me about the video, though, is the final 30 seconds. After he finishes his interpretation of Shakespeare, Nerdwriter says this.
This doesn't mean that true love, the marriage of true minds, is any less real or any less beautiful. It's the opposite, in fact, something Shakespeare knew very well. Beauty belongs to what's impermanent, and we cherish the most the things we can lose.
There's a lot to unpack here in these concluding thoughts, but to start, I think I should say that I disagree with Nerdwriter here. Like, I disagree with him about love. I don't think our relationships are any more beautiful because they end. Sure, he's correct that beauty belongs to the impermanent and that we cherish most the things we can lose, but that's pretty vacuous, isn't it? We also hate the things most that we can lose. We're apathetic most about the things we can lose. 'Cause, we're gonna lose everything. We're all gonna fucking die. Here's the thing. I can't speak to the perspective of an immortal. I can't say what it would be like if we had forever to love and be loved. But neither can Nerdwriter. And in the meantime, when I think about the people I love, it is not the ending that makes me happy, that gives me value. No, I think the love itself is enough, that it is meaningful in and of itself. And that it is true that everything good must end is a sad thing to me, a tragedy. That might sound cynical, like I'm being a downer, but I disagree. To believe truly that life is beautiful and worthwhile is to accept that it will be sad when the jig is up. It's not perfect, but that's the deal we get. But Nerdwriter isn't just saying something I disagree with, he is putting it in the mouth of Shakespeare, and to be honest, I just don't buy it. Shakespeare understood very well that love is more beautiful because we lose it. Okay, maybe you're right from some general perspective, but looking at this poem, it doesn't seem like that's the case at all. Because everything we, myself and Nerdwriter, have said thus far really makes it look like Shakespeare is freaking out. That he wants to make this argument, construct this proof for the permanence of love, but just can't quite do it. It is a deeply unsettling poem, and it's hard to imagine not seeing it that way. In the final lines of Shakespeare's sonnet, he writes that if he's wrong, he's never written a word. And through these lines, we come to understand something. There is a monster behind this poem. And if it can remove the most special thing that has ever happened, if it can remove love, then why can't it remove everything else? The people we know, the ground on which we walk. To admit this monster into the work is so unthinkable, so cosmically horrifying, that his presence cannot be named. If we were to name it, Shakespeare couldn't write a word and the poem would cease to exist. If we were to name it, the world itself would be as good as over because it would have no meaning. And in his own way, Nerdwriter plays along. There's nothing scary here, he says. There is no ghost haunting this poem. The sonnet is kind of like a joke. It's mocking anyone who would care about something as trivial as the permanence of love and the death of everything. Shakespeare knows that all love will end, and he's fine with that. To say anything else would be to imply that Shakespeare might have something he was worried about, that maybe we too have something to be worried about. It would name the monster, and we can't have that. Shakespeare takes us to the edge of doom and stares into it for a moment, and then he needs to look back. And I think it's beautiful, somehow, that so many years later, watching some video on YouTube or reading some book about love, that we need to look back too.